Welcome to another episode of Your City. I'm your host, Dianne Parker, and joining us today in the studio is Wyeth Friday. He is the Director of Planning and Community Services here for the City of Billings, and it's so great to have you stop by the studio, Wyeth.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it and glad to be here today.
Yeah, of course. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the public safety mill levy that was passed in 2021. And I know that that is bringing some positive change to the code enforcement department. Talk to us about what we're going to see.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the levy, when it was put together, included police, obviously, and fire, which a lot of people were very familiar with, but also had code enforcement and legal services, and then also courts as well. And so from the standpoint of my department in the code enforcement piece, that was really significant to be able to include code enforcement. We fit in really well with public safety issues, working with the police department and the fire department and legal on property issues around the city. And so having that levy include some resources for code enforcement was a really significant and important kind of component of that whole that levy effort. And so what's happening is with that levy passage, that is allowing us to add some more officers to our code enforcement division, some more resources to do property cleanups and neighborhood cleanups, which we're going to be rolling out more in the next year and a half, and then also some additional legal support services, so we can work and have some more help from our city legal staff when we get into cases that end up in court and get very more complicated and complex. And we have some different processes where it's really important to have that legal staff helping us get through the process. So we have a variety of things that are now, with that levy passage, we can start to implement in the next couple of years.
Okay, very good. So how does code enforcement work in general? Are you guys able to be proactive, going out and looking for people who are breaking the code, or is it more of a thing where people are calling it in?
Yeah, and so actually that's a great question, because that's something that we're going to be able to see a little bit of a shift in with the change in the levy. So historically, code enforcement has been complaint driven. So we're really dealing with, as calls come in, complaints. There's an online complaint form on the city website where you can fill it out. You can do it, put your name and information, or you can be anonymous. You can get that complaint in, and it gets routed to the code enforcement office. In the past, we've been basically just responding to those. We average about 4,500 complaints a year, and most of those turn into cases that we have to investigate. So that's been our, historically we've had 3 officers dealing with all the residential areas and also handling commercial violations in those same parts of town. We have them spread out into different areas. And then we have 1 officer who's dealt with the really problem properties, what we consider nuisance properties, which are abandoned buildings, burned structures, and things like that. But up until the levy passage, we were and have been just responding to those complaints. We haven't been able to be very proactive because there hasn't been enough time and resources with the staff to be able to do that. So one of the things that's going to change here is with we're able to add 3 more officers to our staff, and we also now have a full-time code enforcement manager, which occurred actually in our last budget cycle right as we were going into the public safety levy. So that was happening, and then the levy added some more help. So with those changes, we're going to be able to be more proactive, both when we're out dealing with the complaints that we're still going to have, obviously a lot of complaints, but looking at seeing other properties that are in violation and addressing those more proactively, and getting into using our the case data, like seeing where we're seeing more complaints in a given neighborhood or different issues that are coming up, being able to go in and do some sort of focused cleanups and things in neighborhoods that we haven't been able to do in the past. So we're excited to be able to do that, work with the property owners, which we always really try to do first, is try and get the properties to come into compliance without having to get into court or anything like that. But even being able to do some neighborhood type cleanups where both the city does some work in the neighborhood, maybe cleans up and grades alleys, we check to make sure streetlights aren't burned out, things like that, and then also help the property owners clean up on their properties.
Okay, so there's a lot going on, a lot of changes. How is it really related? How is code enforcement really related to that public safety issue? Because I know we've all seen it. We've seen a vehicle in our neighborhood, the orange tag stuck on it,
Sure.
Or like you mentioned, the nuisance properties. I mean, it's an eyesore, but it's actually it can be dangerous, right?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah, and that's one of the really important things when we were talking to the community about the levy, and we really have in the past and even will more so now work with the police department especially, because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have a property that, let's say there is a fire in a property and it's then it's not occupied and it sits there, it's not secured, people break into it, maybe even you get animals, other things. I mean, it really turns into a problem property in a neighborhood. So you've got that property itself that you've got those issues with, and it's attracting potentially illegal activity. Then you also it's affecting the whole neighborhood. So anybody who's walking by, the neighbors, of course, that creates issues for them. It's making their neighborhood feel less safe, and also potentially affects their quality of life in those neighborhoods. So being able to address that quickly before you get into a bunch of police calls and a bunch of criminal activity is really where the code enforcement piece comes in. So if we can work on that when something first starts to, a property first starts to have issues, and try and get that addressed early, then it avoids the issue of then lots of calls for service for police, potentially fire also, because sometimes these properties after they've been abandoned do catch on fire also. So it really fits in with that to try to make sure we're getting in there, we're trying to address those neighborhood issues early, and we don't then get into the bigger demand for public safety services. The police have lots of other things that they absolutely need to be handling, and very serious things, and so if we can address that so they're not getting called to those properties, then that makes a difference there.
Right,
too.
It's probably a lot less expensive to catch it in code enforcement than going to the fire department because there's a fire, so.
Absolutely,
Okay.
right, yeah, so it really has a good tie there to try to get those things handled at the earlier stages.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how was the department managed before? I know you mentioned you're hiring, or you have a full-time manager or director. So how was it before?
So in the past, again, with code enforcement, the department that I manage has code enforcement, planning, and community development, all three different divisions. And the code enforcement division historically had a part-time manager. So the same staff member who was also working in our zoning area and planning, our zoning coordinator, was half-time managing code enforcement and trying to work with that division. And what we were seeing was the amount of work and demand in the community for code enforcement was much higher than a half-time person could handle, and actually really do as good a job as possible working with the staff and doing that coordination. So the city council and city administration saw that a full-time manager in that role was really critical if we were going to move things forward and do a better job with our code enforcement efforts. And so that was approved last year, and now we have a full-time manager who her entire position is just working with code enforcement. She actually just started in January. Her name's Tina Hoger. She was worked in the police department. She was a sergeant over in the police department for many, many years, so she's very aware of the city and kind of how things function, but now she's able to take full-time focus on the code enforcement division. So that's been really significant, even in the very short time, for us to be able to have somebody who day to day is able to get out there in the field, work with the officers, and really start thinking about some programming that we just didn't have the capacity to do before.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
What does your team look like? How many staff members? I know you said you hired 3 new ones.
Well, yeah, so we're in the process. So right now we have the manager, and we have a code enforcement clerk, and we have 3 officers who are split up within sort of areas of the city that they take care of. And that's been our current staffing and then with one additional code enforcement officer who just deals with those really difficult nuisance properties. So we've had 4 officers for quite a while. We now, with the levy, are in the process of going to hire three more new officers. So we're hoping to have 1 on board here before the end of this fiscal year, which will be in end of this June. And then we're looking at hiring the additional 2 later on this year when we get into the city will start its new fiscal year in July, and so we'll be able to do that. That goes through the budget process, but it's part of the public safety levy resources. So it's been approved at that level, but we have to get it programmed into the budget. So we'll end up, by the end of this year, our plan is to have those additional 3 hired. And so we'll be almost double basically what we've had in the past. So really significant to be able to get out there. And we're gonna align with the different areas of town that the officers take care of, because some have had a lot more really heavy caseload, and other places we're trying to balance that better.
Right.
And with these new officers, we can do some of that too.
Okay, so who makes a good code enforcement officer? And, do you need to have a law enforcement background?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
You definitely don't need to have a law enforcement background. I think you have to be really good working with people and being able to, put people at ease and really work with them and be able to engage with them to try and get compliance.
Yep.
And not, being really heavy-handed and coming across that way usually doesn't work when you're trying to deal with some of these property issues. It's different than some of the law enforcement issues that can be, in some cases pretty escalated and pretty serious. We get into certainly some issues with some of our property owners when we're trying to get to compliance, but the more you can work with them, be able to speak well and communicate with them is really important to get through that. And then you over time you can learn the codes and those types of things,
Right.
but that interaction with people and understanding kind of when somebody really. We have property owners, especially some elderly and stuff, they really need help. They aren't able to do what needs to be done. And it's not because they don't want to, it's just they're not able to. And so we have to be able to make those decisions and say, okay, this is a situation where we need to help them in different ways versus place other situations where it's like we just need to get this person to comply. So,
Right.
so that people and communication piece is really important.
Okay. Do things like shoveling your sidewalk, does that fall under code enforcement, or is that a different area of the city?
No, that does. So snow removal on your sidewalks is something that we monitor and deal with complaints on. You have to have your snow cleared off your sidewalk within 24 hours of the snow event when this whatever storm occurred. And so we do work with people and deal with that issue. We've had. It's very sort of random based on the season we have. Obviously, sometimes we have a ton of those complaints, a lot of snow, and then other years it's less. But certainly that's something, that we deal with complaints and we try and get out there and address those obviously quickly, so that there's a lot of places where kids are walking to school, and
Right.
senior citizens and people with disabilities who are trying to navigate the sidewalks. It's really they need to be cleared off and have that accessibility.
Yeah. I know you were mentioning sometimes, some of the residents, they just can't get out there and probably do those things like shoveling their sidewalk. I know on one of these other shows we were visiting with Debbie Melling, and I think she said there's a Help Your Neighbor program. So what kind of resources are out there for people?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So we have a program called Snow Buddies, which is probably what she was talking about,
Yep.
and we have people that will sign up to volunteer to help clear people's sidewalks who are not able to, elderly people or people with disabilities, things like that. And so we have a list. They have to tell us. We have to say, put me on that list, and I'm available. And then we're able to, when we get to a property where that person really isn't able to do it themselves, we can offer and say, hey, here's, there's some people you can call, and they'll come and clear that sidewalk off for them. And so that's been a great program. We're always looking for more volunteers. Because some of the folks, to be honest, we've had a few people who will go almost anywhere around the city to help do that, and then others that are like, okay, well, I can handle my neighborhood kind of deal.
Yeah.
So we really want to, make that possible no matter where you are in the city. But that's a resource that's available, and we've continued to kind of try to boost that up to help the people in those situations. We also, just on other services, we really try in some, if it's somebody who needs to talk to like the Yellowstone Council on Aging, maybe there's some programs there to help them, not related necessarily to snow removal, but helping them with their property or things that they need assistance with. We'll try to get them connected with those services too, and then they can decide if that's something that they need or they want to work through. But we do that also depending on kind of the case and what the situation is.
Okay. Yeah, that's great that people in the city can go ahead and volunteer and kind of get involved and help their neighbor.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
really good. We've actually tried to do that also with our weed program in the summer. We've had a harder situation to get for people to agree to help with cutting people's lawns and stuff. The snow removal seems a little more manageable, but that's again trying to do that wherever there's a place where people can help. And sometimes we just have a neighbor who will say, hey, look, let me help do that, and they'll just do it anyway. So,
All right.
yeah.
So maybe we could advertise this as a gardening volunteer opportunity. So if anyone out there listening, you'd like to do some gardening this summer,
Exactly right.
get a hold of Wyeth,
Yeah,
okay?
let us know. Yeah, there's certainly people that could use a little bit of that help too. So.
Okay. So how do people volunteer? Do they just go to the website?
Actually, they can go to our code enforcement website and just you can email or just give us a call. Our code enforcement clerk has the information on that Snow Buddy program and can give them the information, make sure they understand, like, yeah, we'll put you on the list, and then if they get a call, that's what they're getting called about. So absolutely, yeah, if they want to contact through our clerk's office, we can do that.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
So what does the budget look like for code enforcement, and then how much in funds came to code enforcement with the mill levy?
Yeah, so our budget in the past has run about $500,000, about $500,000 for our division. It's part of the general fund of the city, so we don't collect fees or charges that support it, aside from some very small charges for some of our violations, and that goes through the court process. So it's absolutely all of our taxes that we're paying every year are helping fund that division and support that division. We're basically looking at about almost twice, doubling that budget, close to $1 million. So about another 350 to 400,000 of additional money with the levy, and that was set up. That was tied directly to say, okay, if we hired 3 officers, if we added some budget for our property cleanups, which we did, and then also including some of that legal service help. Those were pretty specifically calculated and said, okay, that's what that would look like if we did that. So we're going to be seeing that change in our budget. Actually, this will be the first fiscal year where that'll all start to get programmed in, and then we'll move forward with that. And those will, like I said, most of those pieces, like the hiring and stuff, will get done here in the short term, so we can actually start to kind of make some organization and program adjustments to increase those services and also do some new things.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
So how does the legal part fit into all of this? Is this just if people are refusing to pay their fines, or they're ignoring all of your warnings?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there's situations where, our process for almost any type of complaint for a code enforcement violation is we get the complaint in, and then we go out to see if there's actually a violation. What's going on the property? Is there something wrong? Is there a junk vehicle parked on the front lawn, or is there a parking issue or something? So we get that complaint. We first send a notice to that property. So they don't immediately get ticketed or anything like that. We send them a notice, say, here's, it's basically a courtesy notice. Here's what's the situation. Here's the violation. Here's where it's cited in the code. We give 10 days for initially to comply, and then please contact us if you have questions or if you have any, if there's any issue there. And certainly one of those things can be if they need more time to come into compliance. So if there's something going on and they're like, man, I can get this done in 2 weeks, but 10 days isn't enough or something, we can say, okay, well, we'll work with you and then we'll follow up. But anyway, they initially get that notice. After the 10 days, if we haven't heard anything, then we go back and do a follow-up inspection to see if it's been cleaned up or addressed. If it has, great, that case is done and we can close those. If not, then usually we'll contact them again and find out what's going on, how come it hasn't been brought into compliance, and then if we can reach compliance that way, we will. But if we continue to just have no compliance and they're not working with us, then we can end up citing them into court, either with a ticket that's a non-appearance or an appearance ticket, and then say, okay, then we get to the municipal court, and those go through municipal city court to be addressed. And so what can happen is, depending on where that goes, in some cases, if there's cases that require representation where the violator can have an attorney, then we will have our city attorney help us on our side. Certainly on the more complex nuisance cases with the properties I was talking about earlier, where we've got abandoned structures or issues like that, and those can turn into where we have to take them into court, and then our legal staff helps us through that process. We have to do abatement, ask the court for an abatement order to go and clean it up if they're not going to clean it up, and we do that. So those are the parts where our legal support really becomes important to help us navigate that. Sometimes we end up in district court. Absolutely have to have our legal staff in that case. So those are areas where it's really important to have that support and have our legal staff really familiar with what we're trying to do.
Right. That can get pretty involved, but probably a little bit more of the rare cases, I would think. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have more of those cases than we would like, and I think we're we're hoping over the next couple of years, with the changes we are seeing with our resources and all, that we can address them and deal with some of them better and quicker. But yeah, they're not when I talked about the 4,500 cases a year or complaints a year that we get, those really serious abandoned property and structure cases are a much smaller percentage of that, in terms of, we're probably at any one time dealing with maybe 20 to 30 of those types of properties versus those, several thousand of the others. So they're not, that's not the norm or the majority, but unfortunately, they have a larger impact, like in a neighborhood, if you've got a property that's really got issues. If you're the resident there, you're saying, yeah, we need to get this, dealt with. So.
Yep. All right. Well, before we say goodbye today, can you tell us a few of the violations that you're seeing in the city a lot? Maybe just remind people how they can stay in compliance.
Yeah, sure. So and some of them are seasonal, like you already brought up the snow removal. The summer season, which we're coming into now, the weed season is where from May 1 to the end of to the end of September, we have you have to take care of your weeds, your grass and lawn on your property. You can't have anything more than 12 inches high. It has to be tended and taken care of and cut. So just as a reminder, after May 1, that's when we start dealing with those issues across the city. Again, complaints are a lot of what we see. However, there can be some pretty significant fire hazards in areas where you have an undeveloped property where the entire thing is, 14 inches, 2 foot high weeds or whatever. Right. We want to deal with those and not have that turn into a serious problem. So that's something that's just going to be starting the season. We'll see. It always depends on like the rain we're getting, like today. Yeah. That can make a difference for those weeds that start in May. But that's one that's coming. And then the other big thing that happens this time of year going into the summer is the trailers, the campers and boats on the parking trailers on the street. Not leaving those unattached to your tow vehicle or getting them into your driveway where you can get them off the street. Those are things that we also see a lot of that we work through in the summer.
Okay, and then what are the rules? You can leave it in your driveway for a certain amount of time?
So your camper, if you have a camper trailer, you can keep it in your driveway. You have to be, there's an 8-foot setback requirement from the sidewalk, from your front property line. You've got to keep it set back. If you're just leaving it, no one's living in it, you can keep it there set back like that on your property on a hard surface on your driveway. But if you have it out on the street, you either have to have it connected to your tow vehicle, or if you have it disconnected, you've got to get it hooked up and moved within a couple of days. We let people load and unload when they're coming and going from trips. Obviously, we understand that, but then you've got to get it either hooked up or parked back off the street in your driveway. So that's kind of with the campers. If you have someone coming to visit and they're going to stay in their camper at your house, 5 days is the maximum that they can do that, and then they've got to move from that. You can't sort of start camping out for a long period of time. Yeah. Okay,
that makes a lot of sense and good for everybody out there to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more question comes to mind. The 12-inch high grass, I've seen some properties, let's just say by the rims, that are trying to do more of that natural landscaping.
Sure.
How does that fit?
Yeah, and that's where it's really, that's a great question, because there is some language in the code regarding if it's tended and it's your garden and you're actually taking care of it, and those are the types of certain flowers obviously that can grow taller.
Right.
If it's a situation like that, we'll work through that with the property owner versus just weeds, and there's some more specifics in the code regarding that. But yeah, absolutely, there's people are trying to do some of them are doing kind of the meadow in a can type of stuff where they have these different flowers out there. Yeah, we're not going to if we get out there and understand what they're doing in that case, we won't be saying, okay, you have to cut all your flowers down. Right. But that is a good question, because a lot of what we see, and it can be in an alley or on the parking or different areas where they're just, they haven't, for whatever reason, they've got weeds that have taken off, and those need to be taken care of. But if it's part of your actual planted garden, then that's different. Then
it's okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Wyeth?
I would just say on the code enforcement aspect, just that we're really excited to roll out what the voters, approved last fall. and really do some improvement in how we respond to complaints, how we deal with being more proactive out in the community. And so we're excited in the next year or two to really get some of that going, and we're anxious and we expect that the community is going to see some of that. We certainly are going to be reporting back also on how we're doing and what kind of changes are happening and what that kind of looks like. So just really an exciting time for that, to really make some changes for code enforcement and Billings.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Wyeth, for all the great info.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Okay. We'll see you next time on Your City.